They have a job that's secure and it's predictable. The golden handcuff situation can be really hard to even imagine, breaking out of. I realized I was the one holding myself back. You are someone who figures things out. You will figure this out. I called my husband and I said, do you trust me? Because I'm about to wipe out our bank account. The more you see a full, expansive version of yourself, the harder it is to go back. My coworkers were like, when are you leaving? And why don't you do this? I could find 75 reasons to keep punting it. And people don't just want to have a book written by somebody who has all the things figured out. I'd want to share my music with her and see what she thought of it. This particular venue had been flagged by TED.
Everything I memorized, nope, gone.
So give yourself as many opportunities as you can to do this work, and you will learn what works by actually doing the work.
Hello, y'all. I am fortunate enough to be here today with Rachel, and I had an awesome enough experience in DC to meet Rachel at the Impact 11 Mastermind, and I got to see her speak. And after she spoke, I thought, I gotta have this woman on Speaking to Expand. She's got an awesome story to tell, and she's really grown her speaking business to now she's writing books and doing all this awesome stuff. But I'm not gonna spoil her thunder. Rachel, who are you and what the heck are you doing here today?
Well, I'm a speaker. I'm a singer-songwriter. I'm in the process of becoming a published author. So lots of fun things. But I think more than anything, how I see myself and what I'm here to do is to be a catalyst that shows people what's possible in their life and their work. And so I just help to kind of wake people up a little bit. And the stage is the best way I get to be able to do that.
What was that journey like? Because I know a lot of people, especially people listening here, they have that story, but there's this ceiling of fear of public speaking that's almost in between them and their story getting out there and touching the lives it was meant to touch. How did you break through that kind of ceiling that you had? Or did you never have that ceiling?
So I was a very shy kid. So sometimes people assume that anyone who's on a stage speaking must be very comfortable doing that, or they've always done that. Or of course, this was the person that was the most vocal in class growing up. And I raised my hand if I knew the answer, but I was not a performer growing up. I avoided things that would require me to perform, but I was exposed to people like my dad when I was growing up, watched a lot of Oprah and listened to Tony Robbins all the time. So I was exposed to this possibility-oriented thinking, and I saw really powerful, captivating people speaking a lot, and I was drawn to that. And so there was something about that really appealed to me. And so I didn't intentionally get into speaking. I worked in corporate America for 13 years, and I started getting asked to speak. I spoke in college at a conference. I did a research paper with a professor, and she said, do you want to go speak at this conference in New York City and present your research? And I was like, sure. Something I talk about a lot is about accepting the invitations. And so instead of disqualifying myself because, I'm only 20, I don't have any training in this. Every time I would get asked to speak, I would just say yes. I would try not to overthink it and pull myself out of an opportunity. And I think that is one of the most helpful things that any of us can do, is to not disqualify ourselves. But when we have these invitations, so I just kept saying yes to invitations over and over and over again until I got my first Keynote in 2016, national Keynote. And I got off that stage and I had with every bit of certainty inside of myself that this is what I was meant to do. And so I just found ways to integrate that into my work as much as I could as kind of a business development arm of the company that I worked for. And several years went by after that. And I just got to the point where I was like, I think I can do this on my own. I'm going to take a flyer on myself and I'm going to leave this job and go do this speaking thing.
How was that decision for you? That's always a really tough decision, is leaving the 9-to-5 stability, security to saying, all right, I'm going all in. I'm taking 100% total ownership of my life. What was that like for you?
Well, so my parents work for themselves. So I grew up in an environment where I saw people being self-employed. And so I knew that was a very possible path for me. I didn't think that was out of reach or ridiculous. Some people don't have parents that are supportive. Maybe a lot of people listening may not have people that get that. But for me, that was the model. So I knew I would eventually get to that point. But for me, what started to happen is I burned out in 2017. I was the director of well-being at my company. I burned out. I got mono. I started talking about it more openly and honestly about burning out and what got me to that point. And I noticed the response of people was really strong and supportive, that this part of myself that I'd hidden for a long time. Because I think we all have parts of ourselves that we're like, I don't want anyone, let's hide that. Let's put that somewhere over here. And for most of my life, I did that. And then I started to talk more openly and honestly and vulnerably. And I saw the way people responded to it. And I thought, maybe this is how I'm supposed to show up as a speaker. And, I started to lean into that more and more. And I had my own coworkers saying to me, when are you going to leave? I mean, they asked me, somebody who was at some point going to potentially be my boss said to me after he heard me speak at an event for our company, he said, so how long do we have you? I said, whatever do you mean? I just met you. I'm trying to prove myself. I'm trying to do this more at all of our offices across the country. And he said, you don't need us to do what you want to do. How long do we have you? And I said, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years. And about 11 months later, I gave my notice that I was leaving. So it was enough nudges. And there was sometimes, I think people that are in this space that maybe leave a job that maybe feels secure, because it can feel, I think a lot of people get into this space, they do that. They have a job that's secure and it's predictable. They're like, but I really have a heart to do this other thing. And I felt that very much. And sometimes the golden handcuff situation can be really hard to even imagine, breaking out of. But it got to the point where I had so much, I guess what I call like restless discontent. And I had so many people saying, I think you can do this. There were so many signs that were showing up that were telling me, you have the ability to do this thing. And I went through a professional speaker training with a group called Heroic Public Speaking. At that same time, all this was happening. And I saw this room of people. I was surrounded by dozens of people that were doing the thing I wanted to do. And it made it really real for me that, gosh, if all these people can do this, I could probably figure it out. And I just got to the point where I realized I was the one holding myself back, that my inability to trust myself and my tendency to think about everything that might not work out and all the ways that this could go wrong, I needed to shift something. I needed to be able to trust myself more and be like, you are someone who figures things out. You will figure this out. You have enough evidence. You have enough experience. You built up enough credibility. You can do this. And sometimes that's what we need. We need to be like nudged out, when we're in this state of discomfort, to be able to do the thing we really want to do.
You mentioned one thing about the people that you were able to surround yourself with. I think you said Heroic Public Speaking was what the program or group was called. A lot of people, when they're in that space, that they at first have that desire, but they have no idea how to get around other people that are already there. How did you go from having the desire to finding out where the people that already have that desire are hanging out? What did that journey look like for you?
So it started at a bar in San Diego, and I was at a conference, and there was a guy there named Clay, who's actually part of the Impact 11 community. And somebody said to me, they knew I wanted to speak full time because I was doing it as part of my job, but not my whole job. And somebody said, hey, he's a speaker. You should go talk to him. So this, for anyone listening, think about who is somebody that that's doing this, you might have a connection to, and ask them what communities they're a part of. So I talked to him and I said, if there's a book you'd recommend I read about the business of speaking, what would it be? And he said, Steal the Show. The book's called Steal the Show by Michael Port. And he said he and his wife have a company in New Jersey where they train people how to speak. I'd never heard of it. Looked it up online. I'm in Baltimore. New Jersey is not that far. And they were doing an event in Philadelphia. They don't do these live events anymore, but they had this live events at the Kimmel Center in Philadelphia. 500 people from all over the world would come to this, and they would get little snippets of the types of content and experiences they would get in the larger training. And I went to this thing for 2 of the 3 days, and I was so... Have you ever been in a room of people and you're like, I'm in the right place, where you're just so sure? I was so sure. The energy of working with improv coaches and vocal coaches and performance coaches, I was like a kid in a candy store. I was like, this is so cool. And the energy of that, it was so contagious. And when they made this sort of altar call at the end and they said, we're having this program, you can sign up. I called my husband and I said, do you trust me? Because I'm about to wipe out our bank account to pay for this program. And I signed up for it because I felt like my heart was going to pull me out of my chair if I didn't remove myself and walk to the front of the room and give this paper in. That was the beginning. I just took time off work to do this. I didn't tell anyone I was doing it because I was like, this is my out. I needed an out. And so I got immersed in this community of 80 people. We came together once a month for 4 months, for 4 days. And I felt myself kind of expanding and opening up. And I became known as like the peacock was like my sort of thing that I was associated with there, because I felt like I was expanding like that. Like there was this emergence of a fuller version of me. And the more you see a full expansive version of yourself, the harder it is to go back to the small version of you. And I couldn't unsee it. I just could not unsee it. And all of that was happening at the same time. My coworkers were like, when are you leaving? And why don't you do this? And, opportunities were coming up that I was going to lose out on if I was not on my own. And so that was the thing that made me decide. But the community of people that were so encouraging and so supportive, that were living the life I wanted to live, being around them. So I just asked people, so anyone listening, think about somebody that you know as a speaker and ask them, what's a community that you're a part of that's really been valuable for you? And that's where I would start.
I was part of a coaching program, or am part of it, and his coach is Ed Milet, and he said one thing that stuck with him from his coaching that he had that day, that Ed told him. He said, your extremities expand your capacities, meaning the more extreme you go, you realize what you're actually capable of. Then you're like, wait, I could do that. That's no problem. And it sounds like that's kind of what you're saying, but leveraging the community to expand your extremities. It's a very interesting concept. And you mentioned you're publishing a book right now. How did you go about that decision? I see a lot of professional speakers, they will go about that decision to actually write a book, but it's a tough decision to do. How did you kind of go about that? And what are you doing now to bring that idea and that book that's already in you out into reality?
I'll touch on that. And there's one thing I want to mention that I forgot to mention when I was talking before about something that might be helpful for people really quick. So I'll touch on the book thing in 1 second. But the other thing, being in community, something else that allowed me to do was to access a part of myself that I previously never thought about integrating onto a stage. And so that's like what community can do is community can bring out parts of yourself that you didn't know you had. And so for me, what that was singing. Like I never thought about combining singing with speaking because singing was like the shy version of me does that, but not publicly. Speaking, I'm okay doing that publicly. But this program was the sort of the catalyst for me to start combining these two and sharing the story that you heard when we were in DC. It was that community that was like, you should sing when you tell that story. I thought, oh my gosh, why would I do that? That'd be so weird. Well, what if that doesn't go well? We've all been in rooms where something happens like that. And you're like, that was awkward, and I did not want to be one of those people. So anyway, so I just wanted to mention that as kind of closing the loop on that piece. What community can do is can bring out parts of ourselves that we didn't even know were there, or parts of ourselves that maybe we've set aside because we've decided like, this isn't that big of a deal, or this isn't related to this. Why would I put A and B together? And being with other people can help you see new possibilities that you never imagined before. So that's, I think, another power of community is being able to bring out the fullness in us. The book side of things, I've always wanted to write a book. I've started writing 3 different books. Which may or may not be relatable for people listening, but I started writing a book about nutrition in like 2013. I was a health coach and the director of well-being at my company. And then I was approached by an author to co-write a book in 2018. And I'd written about 40,000 words. And then he and his wife, who was a literary agent, decided to go in a different direction. And then the pandemic hit the same week. And my speaking business that was barely off the ground was dwindled down to like 15% of whatever I'd booked. In the 4 years since that happened, so much in my life has changed that I'm looking back and realizing I would have written the wrong book if I'd written it 4 years ago. So it's sort of recognizing that even if something is a delayed opportunity or dream, trust the timing of it. And so this came about. I met a woman who's an editor named Amanda, and I met her through a facilitator community I was part of during the pandemic. And I was like, I really want to write this book. And so I spent 15 to 20 hours with her on Zoom, just dumping stories about every aspect of, what I talk about. And a year ago, I just decided I really want to get serious about this. And I just finished my first draft, 100,000 words that needs to become 60,000 words, working with her on that. And having the accountability is really important to me. Like I knew if I had just relied on myself to do it, I could find 75 reasons to keep punting it, and having the accountability of somebody else. So now I'm talking to 2 different publishers who I've sent the proposal to, who want to see more, and I'm going to see where that goes. So my goal is that it's published in 2025. Really fun.
Cool. And what does that process look like? I know a lot of speakers out there, they have a book in them, but they have no idea what to do to get it so it's a book that you can buy in bookstores and online and that kind of thing. What does that process look like?
I mean, starting with the, dumping the stories and everything. And, the key part, I don't want to talk about it too much yet, only because it's still in its little being created stage, meaning like it's not, out to be published yet. More to come on that. But I started sharing stories. I knew conceptually, what I wanted to talk about. That's like one of the main things that I talk about in my business. And what I started to do was I just started to think about what were sort of some of the core stories. So we sort of looked at what's the structure of each of the chapters. But before we did, it was just honestly a total free-for-all of sharing different aspects of what this can look like in our lives. And so, this concept of unmuting ourselves, and which is my business is called, it's Unmuted. And when I left my corporate job, I was like, what's the thing I can make that's the ultimate declaration that says, I'm doing the thing I want to do and I'm being myself fully. And it felt like that, saying that. So, talking through these different aspects of what this means. And a lot of it was even pulling from my keynotes, and I've been honing my message through the keynotes, and I've integrated a lot of that stuff into the book as well. So part of it is looking through, for someone who is already speaking, what are some of the core stories that you're consistently telling? And what are some of the themes across those core stories? And what are some of the insights and lessons learned? So for me, every chapter starts with some aspect of my story, goes into some type of insight sharing, and then I've gathered other people's stories that reinforce the content too, because obviously my life is not a representative of all the experiences there could be. So I've spent time interviewing lots of different people, having a live show where I've gathered people's stories for the past 3 years and able to kind of glean from that. So it takes so much time, so many hours of researching articles and highlighting things and going back through old journals. If anybody is listening, you have journals, treasure them, keep them. They're a gold mine for book writing. And it's just been this fun journey of like excavating yourself is what writing a book is like. I know there's so much more work to be done because to take something from 100,000 words to 60,000, you have to really allow for some things that are near and dear to you to not be included. But that's kind of where I am right now. Is I needed to work with somebody who knew how to do this, who knew how to help me build the structure, how to help me build an outline, how to help me write a book proposal. I'd never done that before. So I found someone who did that. And that was really the catalyst that got me to actually do the thing, was having the accountability of, we're talking in 2 weeks and I have a chapter due to you. I'm not going to show up on that call and be like, I didn't write anything. Like I'm paying you on a monthly retainer. I'm not going to not do the work. So part of it is knowing yourself. Some people could do all this on their own with no accountability. I am not one of those people. And so knowing yourself and knowing how you best operate is a really important part of the process of doing something like that. And so that's what I would say. It's like the know thyself piece of like making sure that you know yourself, you know what you need, you know how you're wired, you know what your tendencies are. So I'm really excited to continue to move it along and to share this thing. I have a reverence for books. I've always had a reverence. I can think of specific books on my bookshelf and like season of my life I was in when I read them and how they made me think differently or like shifted my perspective in some way or gave me clarity about something. And I want the book that I'm writing to be the kind of book that does that for people.
What kind of personal development has happened as a result of writing the book?
It's interesting. If you're writing about something, you kind of feel like you want to be the best example of it. So if I'm writing about a topic that I'm like, oh, I have some work to do in that area. One, it's being okay with acknowledging, hey, even though I'm writing about this, I'm not an expert in this right now. And recognizing that people don't just want to have a book written by somebody who has all the things figured out. Because in my mind, I'm like, well, if I'm writing the book, people obviously want to hear from a credible source who has mastered all these areas of your life. And that is unrelatable. People don't want to hear from them. They want to hear from somebody who is honest about their journey. They want to hear from somebody who says, hey, I figured this out, but I'm still not really sure what to do in this one. But this is what I have figured out thus far. It's sort of allowing yourself to be in the incomplete version of yourself and to allow that to be on a page, which is really scary. But for me, because I want people to think that I'm really put together and know what I'm talking about. So for me to say, I struggle with this aspect of doing the thing that I'm talking about, it's prompting me to want to have certain conversations with people because I'm like, if I'm writing about this, I really think I should address it in my life first before I write about it. From an integrity standpoint, I think that's more than anything. Integrity and alignment. I want to make sure that whatever I'm saying, that I'm backing by the way that I'm currently living. I'm not just saying it.
What message do you have for the speakers out there that there's still that imposter syndrome of, well, I'm not a credible enough expert in that to write a book about it yet, but I can speak on it, but I can't write a book about that. I'm not ready. What message do you have for them?
So I say specifically I'll do two things. One, I'll tell a super brief story. And then the other, I'll mention something that I often say, like if I'm talking about this on stage, if I'm talking about how we have self-doubt that gets in the way, I say like, you are not an imposter, you are in process.
Interesting.
You're not an imposter, you're in process. Anybody who is honest about figuring out, anybody who says, I've arrived and figured out all the answers, I don't trust them. Because somebody who's showing up like that has lost a certain degree of curiosity and humility. And I want to learn from people who are saying, I figured out some of this stuff, but like, this is still hard for me. Oh, great, you're human. Thank you for being relatable. I think about when I was in my wellness role, I had a coworker who came up to me one day. When you're a wellness director and you're a health coach, people feel guilty around you if they do anything for their health that's not perfect. And one day she came up to me and she said, Rachel, don't you just want a cheesesteak sometimes? And I was like, I don't like cheesesteaks, but like, yeah, she was basically saying, do you ever like things that are maybe not healthy, or show me that you're relatable is basically what she was asking for. And I was like, yeah, I'm sorry that you get that vibe from me that I'm not here to judge anybody. And so learning that probably a decade ago has been really helpful for me to recognize that people don't necessarily want the fully buttoned up version. They want somebody who has some experience doing something so you can speak to it from a place of lived experience, from a place of some research, from a place of sharing from others' experiences. You may not be the expert, but you may be able to glean insights from somebody who's further along the path than you are. And you can work those in. And that's perfectly valid way of proving a point. I wouldn't necessarily write a book and be like, I'm still figuring all of this out and I have no idea what I'm doing. People just may not see that as credible, but I think it's okay to say, I figured some of this out. Some of this I'm not really sure, because that's where everybody else is too. And so I think recognizing that, if your intent is to serve, if your intent is to help people in some way connect to a new possibility, a new perspective, if your intent is to help people feel less alone, because sometimes just sharing our stories, it just helps somebody feel like, oh my gosh, same. And maybe that's the purpose of the book, to have somebody else feel who's in a similar situation. Oh my gosh, I get what that's like. Yeah, I'm struggling with that. The nature of how I write and how I speak on stage, I'm less prescriptive and I'm more of a choose your own adventure kind of speaker, meaning I ask a lot of questions. So I tell stories and ask questions. And the invitation opens up through that to allow people to see themselves in their own version of whatever I'm talking about through their own experience and their own perspective, as opposed to me saying, these are the 3 things everybody needs to do. I think it's presumptuous. And I think a lot of books do that. A lot of books say, these are the 3 steps everyone needs to follow. I don't know everyone. I don't know everyone's struggles. I don't know what everyone's history or experience has looked like. I don't know everyone's skill set. I don't think I know enough to tell everybody ABC and your life is good. I'd rather be somebody who asks really compelling questions that prompt people to pause and look inside themselves and have their own answer and go on whatever path ends up resulting from that introspection. That's just my style. I don't think I could even have articulated that a year and a half ago, but I've learned that that's what I do as a speaker, that I'm a positive provocateur who invites people to think differently about themselves and their life and what's possible by asking questions.
And once you have your book published, how do you see that impacting your speaking business?
So a funny thing that I did, this is fun for anybody listening to just like Google yourself. I Googled just my first and last name. And in Google, you can scroll to the bottom and it'll show you people also searched. It'll give you like people also searched for, and it'll show you like 6 other searches that came up in addition to that.
Yeah.
So I did that one time, maybe like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And the very first search that people putting, and I've asked other people to do this. I'm like, is this just my Google that does this, or is this everybody's Google that does this? I searched that, and the very first thing that came up at the bottom was Rachel Druckenmiller book. So like people are searching for my non-existent book. And so for me, part of it is, one, I've always loved books. I've always known I wanted to write a book. Books are very special to me. Books were an escape for me growing up. They were a place I found connection. They were a place I felt understood. So I knew I wanted to write a book just forever and ever. I've known I wanted to do this. But I see it as a way to dig deeper into a message. Because when you're on stage for an hour, you're just like dipping your toe in the water with people. And a book allows you to just go so many levels and layers deeper and to sort of allow you to take you home with them. And that to me is, I think, the greatest opportunity. And just to expand to people that might never be in a room hearing me speak also, because not everyone who I want to reach is going to be at an event that I'm hired to speak at. So part of it is opening that up and allowing as many people as possible to hear these messages. And I think, they say it's the new business card now is having a book. And I know there's some events that specifically look for speakers that have books, because they said, we want to give our audience a book as part of the conference. Do you have a book? And so I think it's also a certain degree of like credibility building too, of you've really honed your message enough and your positioning enough and your storytelling enough to be able to put it into a concise and articulate and organized format of a book. And so I think it says something about someone's thought leadership as well, to be able to kind of put that all in one place. So I'm just excited to be able to have greater impact and reach more people with the messages that I care about as a result of writing this book.
When you first kind of got started, was there a mentor you had, whether it be a digital mentor, like an influencer you followed, or an author of a book you read, or someone that maybe they had a program that you paid for their one-on-one coaching? Was there a mentor you've had in your speaking career that you could say, my life would not be the same without mentorship from this person?
It's an interesting question, because I feel like I sort of went about it in such a isolated way. My dad spoke sometimes. Runs his own business. He's a management consultant. He spoke sometimes. But I think in terms of people whose work really shaped me, I feel like it's such a cliche answer, but it's not untrue. 10 years ago, before I was willing to be vulnerable about my own stuff, I read a book by an author that everyone's familiar with called I Thought It Was Just Me, But It Isn't. And it's one of the less commonly known books that Brene Brown has written. And I remember sitting there reading this book. I was in DuPont Circle in Washington, D.C. after a client event, reading this book and highlighting through it. And I was like, I thought it was just me. Like, I thought these things I'm struggling with, I thought I was the only one. So it's interesting to be thinking about this question that you're asking, because I haven't really thought about that specifically before. But as I think about that connected to the type of book I'm writing now, that's how I want people to feel when they read my book. I want people to feel like, oh, I thought it was just me who struggled with that, who didn't talk about that, who was afraid to admit that, who didn't want to acknowledge that thing about myself, who held back in that way, who doubted myself in that way. I thought it was just me, but it's not. And so I think that early influence of reading something like that, of being invited into vulnerability, has really been a significant game changer for me. I mean, my dad is probably the greatest influence in general on my career. He's a storyteller. He likes to be witty. So I learned things about being witty and storytelling and wanting to feel connected to people as opposed to being like pompous know it all on stage. That was just the idea of looking like the sage on the stage the whole time versus being someone who's accessible and relatable. It's just, I was always, I think, very clear on that. And I'd say he influenced that, quite a bit. But yeah, I mean, it's really hard to say. There were two people whose messages I heard on stages earlier in my career that I feel like influenced the type of speaker I wanted to be. There's a woman named Kristen Hadid, who's been a friend and mentor of mine. And when I heard her speak like 6 years ago, I was like, I want to hold a room like that. And now she's brought me in, we've become friends, and she's invited me to come speak at events with her client. Like, so that's been, full circle moment, so she was one that I saw, but just listening to watching a lot of Oprah and Tony Robbins. I mean, stylistically, it's like that, the combination of energy and heart. I watched and listened to hours and hours and hours and hours of them growing up. And I was like, I want to make people cry. I want to make people believe in what's possible. I want to make people believe in themselves. I want people to feel more connected and to feel seen. Those were the models that I had. And I feel like I'm giving a very long, convoluted answer to that question, but I'm thinking out loud in terms of what my response is.
Yeah, that's exactly why I asked, right? It's almost just so it's a flow of thought. You mentioned two people, and I have two questions about them because each of them has had kind of a role in my own life as well. What impact did Tony Robbins have in your life? Was it his books, his videos? Have you been to his events? Was it the communities that he assembled that you were part of that through osmosis of thought impacted you in a way? Or maybe it was the impact it had on your dad that flowed through him that impacted you. What did the impact of him have on your life? Because I see a lot of really, really successful people, however you define success, that have had him in their life in some way.
So the interesting thing is I've never signed up for any communities that he's put on. I've never gone to any of his events. I've wanted to. I'm sure I will at some point. But just seeing, I can literally picture the DVD case that had 8 CDs in it of, I'm trying to remember what the collections were. It's almost like through osmosis, but the way that he influenced my life indirectly was when I was in either 8th grade or a freshman in high school, my parents went to an Unleash the Power Within conference that he put on. And they came back from that conference and they walked in the door. My dad has worked for himself as long as I've been alive. He's worked for himself for, almost 45 years at this point. My mom was a financial planner. She was working for somebody else. She worked in banking. She worked in investments. They walked in the door. And the first thing I remember them saying, my dad said, Mom's going to start her own business. So they came out of this event, Unleash the Power Within. They did the coal walk. They walked across the coals. And my dad, who's been living this life of doing his own thing for years at this point. So she has the model, but neither of them come from a place where people did what they're doing. And it was like to see my mother when I was 14 years old, to see my mother taking this huge gamble. At the time, I don't think I realized how big it was to leave a steady corporate job and to be a family of 2 solopreneurs with 2 kids. Well, 3 kids. That's a huge bet. But to me, I was like, oh my gosh, I saw my mom, and now she's celebrating 25 years of running her own business this fall. And to me, it was what her being a part of that experience catalyzed for me as a young woman who was so impressionable, to see my mom can run her own business and she can do it successfully in a male-dominated field. And so that for me was the biggest impact that indirectly that Tony Robbins had on my life, was the impact he had on my mother's life and how that then affected me and made me see what was possible.
That is amazing. I think it's so cool to kind of unpack the impact that his teachings have had on so many different people. I think it's super interesting. Have you ever told your mom that?
Yeah, she knows. She knows that.
Yeah.
It's in my book as well. Just this idea that I never saw my dad defeated by work, never saw him hate work. I just grew up with this belief that work should be something that I enjoy doing and that I had some autonomy over, that I got to influence. I just assumed that's how work worked. And I'm in corporate very long to realize it's not how it works for most people, but I was determined that that's how it was going to be for me because of their example.
Then the other question I wanted to ask you about someone you mentioned, let's say tomorrow you have an amazing opportunity that someone sends you a text. This opportunity is, hey, Rachel, for your birthday, we entered you in a lottery and you actually ended up winning this lottery. This is not a cash lottery or money lottery. It's you get one day, 8 hours to one-on-one spend with Brene Brown. What are you asking her? What value are you looking to get from that experience?
One, I would thank her because the extent to which her writing has influenced my life and my willingness to tap into my own sense of vulnerability. So I would thank her for that. I've listened to so many hours of her podcast, throughout the whole pandemic, I think I would really want to understand, take me through a journey of little Brene. What were you like? I would just want to unpack as much as I could about what her influences were early on, what she thought about herself early on, what she believed was possible early on, what she was scared of, what she imagined. Asking her those questions in every phase of her life and thinking through to maybe ask her what some of the biggest catalysts and contributors to her growth and her healing, when she thinks about the aspects of herself that she's proudest of healing, restoring, redeeming the most, what has that journey looked like that she hasn't talked about how she's gotten there? Where does she continue to stumble? Because we can see someone like her and be like, I guess you figured it all out. Like, where do you continue to stumble? How do you continue to stay committed to your own deeper growth and healing? Who catalyzes that for you? Who holds you accountable to that? What do you still hope to discover about yourself? What have you discovered recently that surprised you, amused you, or upset you about yourself? What insight would you give to somebody who's aspiring to have the kind of impact that you have on the world and on so many people? You know, someone like me who's wanting to be an author and be a person of influence and speak on the kind of stages that she speaks on. What should I be asking myself? What are questions that, Renee, what are questions that you are asking yourself on a consistent basis? What are questions that other people have asked you that have given you clarity, that have activated new possibilities for you, that have given you insight and depth of understanding? And like, what's next for you in your own growth and development? Some people might think, oh, you're complete. You figured it out. Like, what are you reading? Who are you listening to? Who's the loudest voice in your life right now? And what do you still have yet to contribute? What do you think you have yet to contribute that you have not yet contributed? It's a lot of things. And I feel like if I spent 2 hours thinking about it, I could have a more robust, thoughtful answer. But that's all the gobbledygook that's coming up for me in the moment. Mm-hmm. And I'd ask her if I could share my music with her. I'd want to share my music with her and see what she thought of it. See what like came up for her as a result of listening to it.
And how did you originally find her?
I don't even know. I wish I
That's
even
good marketing.
I wish I even knew how I found her, because this was like, you know, I mean, Instagram, like stuff was out. I mean, I probably first found her in like 2013, 2014. It might've been through the health coaching communities I was a part of, maybe her TED Talk. I actually don't even know. Or maybe somebody said, I read this book, I think you'd enjoy it. I wish I knew. I have no idea how I found out about her.
And you, I think when you spoke on stage, you had mentioned you had just given a TEDx talk, right?
I did, yeah.
What was that experience like for you? Why did you choose to do it? All that kind of stuff.
It's a bittersweet experience for me. Always wanted to do a TED Talk. Renee's was probably one of the first ones I ever saw. And I hired a coach to pitch me, because I was like, I don't even know where to begin to like pitch these events, to get myself out there. I'm going to be competing with hundreds of people, maybe thousands depending on the event. I don't know what they're looking for specifically. So I hired someone who's like, guaranteed I'm going to get you a spot, and a spot that you want to have. So we went back and forth. I sat on it for like 9 months because I was looking for more clarity on what I really wanted to say. And then I thought I had a framework that I was happy with. So we worked out, and then the gig opened up that was going to be near me, within an hour drive of where I live. And the TEDx was going to be on my birthday. I mean,
make it more obvious. Yeah.
The theme was fresh perspectives. And I said, I think I have that. I think I have a fresh perspective, because I knew you have to go rehearse. And I thought, well, it's going to be easier to rehearse if I can drive there as opposed to fly back and forth somewhere where, you know, it's harder for me to do rehearsals. So I said, yep, let's do that. So apparently there were 300 people that applied for that event, and 8 of us were selected. And you know, what's interesting, it was a smaller venue than I think would have been ideal for, because it's like the space that you're in affects how you show up. And so if you're in like a bigger space and there's more room to expand, you can feel more expansive. So it was a smaller event, like 100 people, which meant the stage was smaller. So I was very limited. I mean, I don't like move on stage a lot. Like if I move with purpose. I'm not like a dancer, you know, like a shifter, which you see a lot. People are nervous. I was when I first started speaking. I was very shifty on stage and not moving purposefully at all. And then I was told that's distracting. Don't do that. So I had a coach that I'd worked with before around it, and he helped me build out like the framework, sort of building into different sections. So I wasn't memorizing 18 minutes. I was memorizing like, you know, 8 2-minute segments, and that felt more manageable. But I feel like the hard part about it is, and this may be good for people to know, but this particular venue had been flagged the year before. Like 2 other talks had been flagged by TED. I guess if you share things that are anecdotal, not backed by research, they will flag your talks, and it'll have a little note underneath the video, like the content in this is not whatever supported by TED. So I sort of had like the fear of God instilled in me of like, you better make sure everything you say has some type of evidence base or it's going to get flagged. So I was much more in my head in how I prepare than I normally am when I prepare for a speech. I memorized that thing verbatim. Probably 98% of what I said, like I knew exactly what word was going to come out at what moment. And I know this is not what you're asking, but I just want to share this very honestly in a raw way, because
please, yeah,
because I think this is what people need to hear. There were parts where I felt like this isn't really me when I was being guided to do something or directed to do something. I was like, this isn't really me. This doesn't really feel like me, but they're the experts. So I guess I'll defer to the expert on how to do this, even if I don't feel it 100%. And I tried to cram in every minute. Like I should have cut 2 minutes of content out so that I could have breathed more. I did a thing I wanted to do. I sang in it. I wanted to sing in it. And as part of the story I was telling. But looking back, I'm like, there's so many things I would do differently. Here's the thing I did not know about TED Talks. I did not know that a lot of the time, maybe this is just my event, but they can be heavily edited. Meaning somebody gets up there and they speak and they forget what they're going to say, and then they restart. And that might happen 5 or 6 times in one talk, but then when it gets edited, it looks like they did it really with no breaks. And even the best of the best speakers can get tripped up sometimes. Kelly Clarkson forgets her own lyrics, you know what I mean? And no one says she sucks as a singer. So, but I was determined to do it straight through. I was determined to not take a break. I was determined to not make a mistake. I was like, I am going to deliver this end to end as it is meant to be delivered. And I did that. And I was really proud of the fact that I did that because it's really hard to do that. But in retrospect, the nature of how I show up as my best self is I'm more conversational with people. And, I have a little more freedom to move and I'm a little bit more playful and I'm not in my head so much. And so I want to do another one. I want to redeem this moment. So all that to say, the process was really good at helping me hone certain messaging and certain stories and that kind of thing. And it gave me a new opening for the keynote I deliver now. So coming off of how I didn't want to do that taught me something about how I did want to shift how I open something. So it's everything is, fodder for learning if we let it be. But I would say for anyone doing it, trust your gut, trust yourself. And yeah, so it's out there. I don't think it's my best work. I also know I'm hypercritical and I've had friends that are like, I'm not sure if we were watching the same talk or not, but I was crying when I watched it and it was really profound. And maybe we're not watching the same talk because we're our own worst critics. I've never talked about that so publicly, but Ryan, for you in this community, I just feel like what good does it do to not be fully transparent about these things because this is the reality of how this stuff sometimes goes, Yeah,
I know it was tough for me to kind of, when I got off my first TEDx talk, I was like, oh my gosh, I did not remember any of the script. I said the first 2 words of what I had memorized and I blanked. My mind just went zero. Everything I'd memorized, nope, gone. And I was like, okay, all right, I got to stay up here and do this. And then I started talking about that and people came and said, hey, thank you so much. I thought it needed to be perfect and all this kind of stuff. So I'm glad you opened up about it. 2 more questions for you because I know we're tight on time here.
Sure.
Where can people find you on the internet to keep a smaller version of you in their pocket?
RachelDruckenmiller.com. So that's DRUCK. I tell people not drunk, Druck. And LinkedIn, I'm most active on LinkedIn. And then I'm on Instagram at Unmuted Life and then on YouTube. I don't really go on any other social channels, but those are the main. And Spotify. If they want to find my music, they can find me wherever they stream music. They can search Rachel Druckenmiller and find my music.
Cool. And what is one piece of advice or guidance that you would give to the aspiring speaker, the professional speaker, or the entrepreneur that speaks to grow their business?
Accept the invitations that come your way, even especially if they're just starting off doing this or they're not fully established, even if the pay isn't exactly what you want it to be, get in reps. The most important, get in reps, get in front of as many people as you can, work on honing your storytelling. And you can't do that any other way other than doing it. So give yourself as many opportunities as you can to do this work, and you will learn what works by actually doing the work.
Boom. Love it. Well, if you're listening here and you found valuable what Rachel has shared here, her vulnerability, her honesty, and you've got a friend that you think needs to hear this, you can share this with them and hopefully they'll find the value that Rachel has been able to share today, guys. Rachel, thank you for being here. And guys, thank you for listening. Cheers, y'all.